start the meeting, can I ask either Stephen or Mark to read out the protocol first in regards to how proceedings will be commenced in a hybrid session, or is that you, Caris?
I was going to say I'll be doing that this morning, Chair, if that's all right with you.
Thanks, Caris.
So, can I welcome all members and officers to this meeting of the Governance and Audit Committee, which is being held as a hybrid meeting with access via the Council Chamber or from remote locations via Microsoft Teams. The meeting is being recorded and will be available via the Council's website to be viewed as soon as practicable following the meeting. Please could everybody ensure that mobile phones are switched off or are on silent mode. Members will have received an electronic copy of the agenda. Officers will be asked to present a summary of the key points for each item. For the record, the agenda can be viewed on the Council's website. Members and officers will be speaking at various points during the meeting, and those speaking may switch on their cameras at that point. But we would ask that, with the exception of the chairperson, at all other times you keep your cameras and microphones switched off, as this will help to minimise any background noise and interference and to ensure that the connection remains as stable as possible. Whether in the chamber or remote, if any members or officers wish to raise a point or question, they should press the hands up icon on the screen at the top right-hand side of the Microsoft Teams window, and the Chair will come to you in the order he receives those requests. Please lower your hand once you have finished speaking. The chat button has been disabled for this meeting. Please do not use your microphone until the Chair invites you to do so. Officers from Democratic Services will be supporting the meeting and will be monitoring the use of microphones throughout the meeting, and where necessary will mute those not being used. We would ask that officers introduce themselves as and when you are invited to speak during the course of the meeting, and they too should ensure microphones and cameras are switched off when not in use. We can now proceed to the agenda business. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for doing that, Caris. Greatly appreciated. If we start at the agenda then, item number 1, apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We received apologies from Councillor Richard Granville today.
Thank you very much. No one else indicating there's any other apologies. Item 2 then, declarations of interest. There's no one showing any declarations of interest. Item 3, approval of the minutes, pages 3 to 16 for correctness only. Someone prepared to move? Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Can I have a second? Thank you, Councillor Griffiths. Anyone against? Because that's the easiest way on my machine. No, thank you, that's carried. Item 4 on the agenda is Governance and Audit Committee Action Report, pages 17 to 22, and that's over to Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Mark Alvin, Senior Democratic Services Officer Committees. The purpose of this report is to provide members with an update on the Governance and Audit Committee action record. In order to assist the Governance and Audit Committee in ensuring that decisions made by the committee are actioned and implemented, the record is attached to Appendix A. The action record will be presented to each meeting of the committee for approval, as members are now accustomed to. So without further ado, Chair, I'll take you to 9.1, the recommendation, which is that the committee is recommended to note the action record and provide any comment upon this as appropriate. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mark. Any questions, anyone? No, any comment? No, you see the recommendation then to note the comment, note the action record. Someone prepared to move, please?
I move, Chair.
A second.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you very much. Been moved and seconded. Anyone against? No, thank you. That's carried. Item 5 on the agenda then is the draft statement of accounts 22-23, and that's you, Nigel, I think.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning. For the record, Nigel Smith, Group Manager, Chief Accountant. The purpose of this report is to present to the Governance and Audit Committee the unaudited statement of accounts for 22-23 for noting and those are attached to Appendix A to the report. The accounts are prepared in line with the requirements of the Accounts and Audit Wales regulations and also the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy's Code of Practice on Local Authority Accounting in the United Kingdom. The regulations require that the draft accounts are published. Sorry, we've got feedback somewhere, I think. The regulations require that the unaudited statement of accounts are approved and signed by the responsible financial officer by the 31st of May, and then approved by this committee once audited by the 31st of July. As members will be aware, the 21-22 accounts were delayed.
Sorry, Nigel. Is anyone can do anything about that feedback?
We've still got feedback. I think we still have feedback somewhere.
You got F button pressed.
Okay. Yeah, that seems better. Is that resolved now?
That's better. Yeah.
Right, apologies. The requirement of the regulations is the draft unaudited accounts are published by 31st of May, and then the audited accounts approved by this committee by 31st of July. As members will be aware from the 21-22 accounts, those were only approved in January of this year. So as a result, there have been subsequent delays to the preparation of our 22-23 accounts. In line with the regulations, we have issued a notice explaining this, but we are now due to publish the draft accounts this week, and the notice of inspection has been published ready for anyone who has an interest in looking at the accounts. The accounts are provided at Appendix A, and just to note for this committee, they are for noting, but if there are any queries, happy to take any questions in advance of the recommendation at 9, which is for the committee to note the unaudited statement of accounts. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that, Nigel. Obviously, we did have a session earlier this month where you kindly went through the draft statement of accounts, and clearly they're here for us to ensure there's the assurance that they are the draft statement of audited accounts, and will wing its way to the Audit Wales in due course. Over to members. Questions? Councillor Griffiths.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, it's a comment, I think, which is, I think there have been some changes since we saw this, some small ones, which I think I'm appreciative of. 2 points I'd like to make, which really maybe for next year's accounts. One of them is the decarbonisation 2030 section is relatively small in the statement of accounts. Really would like us to note that in the statement of accounts next year, this needs to be a much broader section and a much more detailed section about how we are addressing our 2030 targets. So not a complaint for this year, but it's really just a note for next year that we really need to do that. Also, I'm appreciative of the improvements to the balances and reserve statements. But I think we can still do a little bit better in clarity for non-financial people. On page 38 in the report, we've got a nice breakdown of the usable reserves now, and I think that's very clear, which are the council fund, which are earmarked reserves, which are capital receipts reserves. But I think a little bit more explanation of those terms, even at this level, would be helpful for those 4 categories. So again, not for this year, for next year, I think.
Yes. Thank you, Councillor Griffiths.
There was one other point I wanted to make, which was around the treatment of Cardiff Region deal. When we look at page 43, we've got the numbers, and I know the reason behind this. We've got the numbers for 21-22, but we don't have the numbers for 22-23. But I couldn't actually find an explanation in the notes that was clear about why there was effectively a gap in this year's numbers. Maybe it's there, but I couldn't find it myself when I did a quick search after reading them through. So it's really about, if you see a gap, the immediate thing is, well, why is the gap? And then when you look for the note, and I couldn't see it, but it may well be there, and I just couldn't find it. But I just noted that one.
Thank you, Councillor Griffiths. Nigel?
Yeah, no, thank you for those comments. They're really much appreciated. Just to note, yeah, the Cardiff City deal figures, you're right, they aren't included in this year, and we probably haven't explicitly stated that in the accounts, but just to confirm, we are awaiting the figures, and they will be included in the final audited accounts that are published and agreed by this committee.
Yeah, I understand that. It's just somebody without our knowledge may wonder why. That's my comment, really. But thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Nigel. Councillor Bledsoe?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I'm just flipping between pages. I would like to thank all staff for the briefing that we had recently about this rather hefty document. I wasn't able to join you live, but I have watched it back, and it was very insightful and helpful. My question or point of clarity really is at the top of page 31 of the statement of accounts, where it states Bridgend councillors' political party representation. It states that there are 3 members of a political party called the Llinvi Independent. But this isn't about splitting down political groupings. This is listing political parties. Llinvi Independents aren't a political party. I've just checked on the website, and I've spoken to our colleagues who are on this council who are on the Democratic Alliance, who've told me that the Llinvi Independents are not a political party. So that probably needs moving into independence rather than being under Llinvi Independents. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Sorry, Nigel.
Sorry, Chair. I say thank you for that. We'll take that away and look and amend as necessary.
Councillor Griffiths.
Yeah, just a comment on that. So I did a little bit of research around the difference between groups and parties, and I'm not clear about in statement of accounts whether we should be reporting the groupings, because we also have group leaders for the different groups of independents, but they're clearly not political parties. So just want clarity about which of those we should be reporting on, whether it's pure parties or whether it's the groups that are recognised by the council and therefore have group leaders. So really following on from Councillor Bledsoe's comment. We seem to have a halfway house, I guess, is where we are, and we need clarity of which it actually should be, or possibly even both.
Yeah, thanks for that. We'll take that away and look at it in response to those queries.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, obviously we've had some comments in with the questions. We've got the recommendation before us that that we note the unaudited statement of accounts at Appendix A. Someone prepared to move, please?
I move, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Griffiths.
Seconded, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Anyone against? No, that's carried. Thank you very much. We're on to the next item on the agenda, which is the annual governance statement. Just get the report up. Okay. Nigel, or is that you, Caris?
No, I think that's me on this particular one. Thank you, Chair. So just for the sake of the recording, I'm Caris Lord and I'm the Chief Officer for Finance, Performance and Change. So the purpose of this report is to present to you the annual governance statement for last year for approval and inclusion within the unaudited statement of accounts for last year. You'll all be aware that good corporate governance requires the active participation of members and officers across the council, and these arrangements are reviewed on an annual basis, and the findings are used to update the annual governance statement, and this helps to ensure continuous improvement of the council's corporate governance culture. The inclusion of the annual governance statement within the statement of accounts provides an overall appraisal of the controls in place to manage our key risks and identifies where improvements need to be made. So the draft annual governance statement for last year is attached for you at Appendix A of this report. It describes the extent to which the Council has complied with its Code of Corporate Governance and the requirements of the Accounts and Audit Wales regulations. It sets out how the Council has responded to governance issues identified during the year and also actions taken following an annual review of the governance framework. So the committee provides independence assurance for us on the Council's internal audit control environment. And as a statutory committee, it now consists of 8 councillors and 4 lay members. We also have work done by our external regulators, which feeds into this process. And you'll see in the report comments from Audit Wales and Care Inspectorate Wales, who do cover governance issues in their reports. We also face a range of risks, which you will be aware of, and we do report the risk assessment to yourselves on a regular basis so that they can be challenged by both yourselves and by, also goes to senior management across the authority. We have robust arrangements in place with regards to our financial control, and these are reviewed by Audit Wales, and they report to us on an annual basis on those. We also had an unqualified audit opinion on our financial statements for last year, and also the head of the Internal Audit Service has given the Council an assessment of reasonable assurance for the 22-23 financial year. And all of these things have been fed into the draft statement that you have in front of you. You will see that within that statement, we have updated information with regards to the issues that were raised in last year's annual governance statement, and there are also issues identified from 22-23, which we will take action on during the current financial year. Just to stress, this is a draft annual governance statement at the current time, and it will be reviewed by Audit Wales as part of the work that they're now going to start on our statement of accounts for last year. A final version of the annual governance statement will be included with the final statement of accounts and will be presented to this committee later on in the year. So if I can, Chair, I'll just take you to the recommendations in section 9, where we're asking that Governance and Audit Committee approve the draft annual governance statement and agrees its inclusion within the unaudited statement of accounts for 22-23. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that, Caris, and thank you for that clarity, because obviously it goes in with the unaudited statement of accounts, but it may change in between prior to the audited accounts coming out, which are approved. So thank you for that clarification. Okay, over to members. Any questions? Councillor Griffiths.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I've got a question which has arisen from around the Constitution, which is we've just implemented, as it covers in the report, a set of changes to the Constitution. But my understanding is that there's no regular review of the Constitution. It's not an annual review, at least. And I do wonder whether we should be making a stronger requirement to be continual changes in a smaller set of changes into the Constitution, rather than a bit of a lump sum that we had. And we just had a major review based on, I think, legislative changes. I do feel we need something which is more regular and sometimes a little bit more detailed. I mean, a couple of the issues that have come up recently are things like meeting duration. And one of my hobby horses is breaks within meetings, because at the moment we don't have those things covered within the Constitution. And I do think a 10-minute break every 90 minutes or whatever is good practice, and would be helpful to put in the Constitution. And things like what you do in overrunning meetings when a significant number of members have to leave a meeting because of previous commitments, but you don't fall below quora. It's not within democratic principles if we're going to lose significant numbers. Just things like that. I'm not asking for answers for those specific issues, but those issues are things which are coming up in our normal day-to-day council work, and I think would be good to be addressed in the Constitution on a more regular basis. So really that's the question here is, can we move to a more regular review of the Constitution?
Do you want me to come in there, Chair?
Yeah, if you would, Caris.
As you said, Councillor.
The only issue I'd point out is it may not be a matter for our committee, even though we're governance, but I think we could actually make a recommendation that this matter should be looked at by the Democratic Services Committee, which is a statutory committee now, isn't it? And something that should be looked at there.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, you've said probably much of what I was going to say, really, which is you're right, Councillor Griffiths. We've recently done a major review of the Constitution, as have all local authorities actually across Wales, and that was agreed by Council, wasn't it, in the last few months. My understanding is we do have the ability to make changes to the Constitution as and when they arrive, as opposed to a regular review of it. But I will take that issue away and speak to the monitoring officer about it with regards to and I suppose just make you aware of what the process is, if there is a need to update that constitution, whether or not we do it as and when, or whether or not we do it on a regular annual basis, for instance. So I can certainly ask the monitoring officer for that and come back to you if that's okay.
Many thanks, Caris. I've got 2 other points, Chair. Do you want me to carry on or give way to somebody else to do theirs first?
Oh, no, if you've got 2 other questions, you carry on.
Yeah, so it's really around at page 127, I think, but it's not specific. It's more about the relationship between us as a broad council and applying the code of conduct within community councils. It seems at the moment that there isn't a legislative link between the responsibility. So although most of the community and town councils have adopted the same code of conduct, which is the standard one, I think, set out by at the Welsh level, I don't think we have specific responsibility, even though complaints can come on behavioural councillors, for example, from community councils into the council. So this is an area where I'm not entirely clear what our responsibilities are, BCBC, over those separate entities, which are the community councils. There's obviously a link there in terms of conduct, but it's a bit unclear to me. And I wonder whether at some point, it's not necessarily on this report, whether we could get a bit more clarity on how BCBC can help manage good behaviour and good practice within community councils.
I think, Councillor Griffiths, that's another issue for the monitoring officer to address, given that the monitoring officer has some responsibility for community councils. And as you quite rightly say, any breach of the code of conduct will either come to the standards committee or the authority. It can be dealt with within your, obviously, informal arrangements, or if it's that serious, it will go to the ombudsman. And if the ombudsman considers it important, they will look at it, or they could actually refer it back to the standards committee. But it's a question, I think, that needs to be put to the monitoring officer, and maybe a little note out to elected representatives as to what the role of the county council is vis-a-vis the community councils. I don't know whether that would help. I don't know whether I've stood on Caris's toes again now, but that would be my view. There is a responsibility of the monitoring officer, but if you're unclear, then many other people will be unclear. And I suggest maybe a little A4 note from the monitoring officer to clarify the issue.
Thank you, Chair. I think those suggestions are absolutely perfect.
Okay, I don't know whether Caris would agree, because obviously I've got no authority over the officers of the council, but I think that may be the easiest way if people are unsure. Thanks, Caris.
My last point, Chair, was page 131. We've adopted a social responsible procurement strategy. I'm touching definitely on policy here, but we need a green procurement strategy as well if we're going to hit 2030. So that's a policy thing, but it's referred to in here. And I think from a governance perspective, I think we should be expecting a statement around green and procurement strategy in the governance report, and how we do the procurement, and then how we govern that procurement against those green objectives.
Yeah, thank you for that. Obviously, Caris, I don't know whether you can comment on that.
Again, happy to take that away and look at it really, and talk to our procurement team with regards to how we could include that in our practices, but also we can put something in this particular statement as well. So happy to take that away.
Thank you. I think it's probably a CMB type of approach as well, because we need to change the way that we're thinking about green and embed it in all the areas. And I don't think we are. Our plans, I'm sure we'll do that in the near future, but the more we can accelerate those. And I guess the responsibility of this committee is to make sure that those types of things are happening within the different directorates. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Councillor Griffiths. I know we're considering an issue in our in a later report where obviously the green agenda is missing and 2030 targets are mentioned specifically. So obviously a lot of these things will certainly overlap. Next one is Andrew Bagley.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to make a couple of comments. Firstly, just thanks again for a very comprehensive and well put together document. Just got 3 quick comments really for consideration and taking away. I think it's with the external reader in mind. I'm going to draw to your attention to page 21 or page 139 of the pack, which is the audit assurance statement. And my 3 comments were, I think it talks about internal auditors work remotely. I don't know if we want to reword that to working in a hybrid manner, because it does then go on to say they've been working remotely and doing face-to-face. So for me, it's not working remotely, that's hybrid. The second point then was, if I jump to the bottom of the page, it talks about actions being at various stages of implementation. I don't know if that's sort of a clever wording for saying we do have overdue actions or not. I think it'd be better or cleaner or stronger if we could say there's no significant overdue actions, perhaps. And then my third point was where we talk about the audits that are deferred. Again, it would probably be stronger if we could say those audits that were deferred were approved in some sort of forum. And also the fact that if they were deferred, they weren't considered significant in the overall context. I think that would just help the overall statement. But otherwise, thank you. Good.
Thank you for that, Andrew. Carys?
I would say happy to take those comments away and have a look at them. I think they're constructive, and we can update those before we issue the final annual governance statement.
Thank you for that, Carys. Councillor Bledsoe.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Sorry, I couldn't even get to the unmute button fast enough then. My fingers weren't working. I do apologise to you. It was just really to build on the first point that Councillor Griffiths made in relation to our constitution and the fact that we are an audit and governance committee. And I think it does fall under the governance. I tend to agree with you on that. I'm just wondering, I mean, both Councillor Griffiths and quite a few of the members on here are members at this level and also at town and community council level, where, you know, at town council level, every AGM, we reapprove our standing orders. And I'm just wondering whether this committee could consider a recommendation, perhaps, that the constitution is reviewed on an annual basis at our AGM. So it does pick up the little things that don't get done in the day, not major reviews, but councillors have the opportunity to work with the relevant committee, the committee that looks after the constitution, to make the review of a constitution a requirement of an AGM, which happens at other levels of councils. And I don't know if local authorities do. I've only been here for 14 months, but we are looking at the best way to govern how we operate, and it's just something for consideration, just something to build on what Councillor Griffiths had said. Thank you.
If it's all right with you, Councillor Bledsoe, I'm happy to take that away with the issues raised by Councillor Griffiths and have a discussion with the monitoring officer with regards to that.
Yeah, I think that's important, Carys. The community councils have got a completely different set of standing orders. They don't have a constitution; they have a set of standing orders, as previously to the sort of 2020 legislation that local authorities used to have. And it's a completely different set of similar provisions in regards to rule debate, etc. I think the concern I would have is it just needs to be looked at maybe by the Democratic Services Committee, but to approve it every 12 months is a huge task. I don't know how big the new constitution is, but I know in the council I used to belong to, it was well over 600 pages. And I think those things that need to be looked at. I agree that there should be at some stage a small task and finish group to pick up minor points as they arise. But clearly, it's whilst this is the governance committee, I think we can be assured there's a constitution which meets the current standards. But again, it's a matter, as you said, for the monitoring officer and the management team and the council to decide. It's a big task, in all honesty, to look at it. But thank Councillor Bledsoe for raising it. Councillor Griffiths.
Thank you for letting me back in again, Chair, on this point. If I could just add to that, what I'm looking for here is a system of continuous improvement about how we become a better council. Now, it may be that some of the things we've talked about today don't need to go in a constitution. They could be just a best practice guide that is not mandatory, but we would, as councillors, we would all try to stick to that. So I think there are other ways that we may be able to achieve this. Because I appreciate your comments, Chair, around the large amount of work that trying to sign off a large constitution would have every year. But maybe we need to think about what needs to be in the constitution and what needs to be in other documents. And there may be other documents that we don't have at the moment that could be helpful, like, for example, a meeting. And I'm thinking back to your comments about the standing orders. Very often the standing orders for community councils do cover a quite detailed process within meetings. And that could be something that we just have as a best practice guide for our meetings. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Griffiths. I think, if community councils had to adopt the constitution, then that would be a quite interesting task, really, for them. But I think it's a matter for, the monitoring officer and the council itself to decide. So I'd leave it to Caris and her colleagues, really, to look at that. So if there are no other questions or comments, it is a legacy hand, Councillor Griffiths?
Yes, apologies.
No, that's all right, don't worry. If there are no other questions or comments, then if we go to the recommendation, the recommendation is that as Governance and Audit Committee, we approve the draft annual governance statement at Appendix A and agree its inclusion within the audited statement of accounts for 22-23. Someone prepared to move, please?
I move, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor
And
Hughes.
I'll second.
Thank you very much, Councillor Griffiths. Anyone against? No, that's carried. Thank you very much. Next item, I believe, is the fourth call, which I think is Nigel. Have I got it right this time?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Again, for the recording, Nigel Smith, Group Manager, Chief Accountant. The purpose of this report is to present to the committee the unaudited Porthcawl Harbour return for 22-23, which is attached to the report at Appendix A for approval. The preparation of the return is a requirement of the Accounts and Audit Wales regulations and is produced on the basis of the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy's Code of Practice on local authority accounting in the United Kingdom. The Harbour return requires certification by the responsible financial officer and publication and approval by this committee and publication by the 31st of May under the regulations. If this is not possible, then under Regulation 10 we would issue a notice explaining why on our website, which we have done. Once this committee approves the return, it's passed to audit for auditing. If there are no amendments identified by the external auditors, there is no further action required and the return is approved. If there are any amendments, we would bring the return back to this committee, outlining what those amendments are and seeking reapproval by the committee. As noted in the current situation, the Harbour achieved a balanced position at the 31st of March. It generated just under 259,000 in fees, which is primarily for boat berthing and mooring. The key items of expenditure are staffing costs and depreciation of the harbour asset. The Porthcawl Harbour return has been reviewed by internal audit and no amendments were identified. So if I may, Chair, take you to paragraph 9.1, the recommendation is that the Governance and Audit Committee approves the unaudited Porthcawl Harbour return 22-23 as at Appendix A. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Nigel. Again, very comprehensive report. Any questions? No question. Oh, Councillor Davis. Councillor Davis.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, thanks, Chair. This is just a slight aside, really, to the accounts. I just wondered, it mentions the kiosk and the slipway, but what is the extent of the Porthcawl Harbour buildings on the quayside at the top there, newly refurbished a few years ago. There's a cafe, bar, pizza, restaurant, etc. So what's the extent actually of the asset? Does anybody know?
I'm afraid we don't know that. That's probably outside of our knowledge in doing the accounts, but I'm more than happy to take that away, Councillor Davis, and come back to you with that information.
Yeah, just because it says in the document, it says the fees were generated primarily for both birthing and mourning. So I wondered, you know, how else we generated income. So, and also obviously it was, you know, in relation to Cozy Corner, I guess Cozy Corner is a completely separate ownership entity, but I just wondered if there was any connections and, you know, what were the legal statuses of the different land, etc. You know, that kind of thing. So, Caris, I'd be grateful. Cheers. Thanks. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. As Gary said, I think some of these things are outside our remit, but I'm sure Caris will get back to you with the relevant information. Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. It's just a very quick comment. I think we're approving this, or asked to approve this, on the basis that they're unaudited. If I can just note that that approval would probably come on the back of the annual governance statement, which is on the second page. I think that just needs to be completed. So I'm assuming all of those would be yes, that all those arrangements are in place. Thank you.
Sorry, yes, that would be the case. I don't know whether it's just not come out on the PDF, but they should have been completed, so apologies.
Sorry, thank you for picking that up, Andrew. Councillor Crevis.
Yeah, it's a query really on the debtors and creditors part. We've got that sum of 39,893, which effectively disappears from this year's accounts. I just wonder, does that mean that there will be a £40,000 excess next year if things go according to plan? In other words, that number's disappeared. What is the impact for the future on that number disappearing from our accounts this year? Is that a sorry? I always get difficulty trying to read these. Is that the repayment of a debt? That actually that is.
Thank you. Yeah, very good question. It probably looks a bit strange that it's the same number on both sides. Yeah. This is the accounting treatment that we've agreed with Wales Audit or Audit Wales in terms of mooring fees paid in advance, so they are a reserve creditor, and that's to move the income into next year. And then the cash balance is treated as a debtor, an equivalent amount of debtor that we're holding someone else's cash until next year. So that's why they're both the same figures, but the opposite way.
Okay, but those don't appear in the total cash number, though.
It'll be in cash for this year, but it'll be shown as income into next year then, because it's fees in advance.
Okay, I'm just a bit confused. We got in all accounts the sum of all current and deposit bank accounts. So that money is some. Maybe this is my lack of knowledge of this area, but if we have the sum of all bank accounts, isn't that money sitting in a bank account somewhere, and shouldn't it appear in the bank statement total cash line, or is that why it's in the other lines?
Sorry, Councillor Griffiths, I'm not sure I'm quite understanding.
No, okay, I'm not explaining myself very well. I think it's my misunderstanding, but let me just try again. In line 9, we have all accounts. My reading of that is normally that is the sum of all of the balances of all of the bank accounts in effect. But that's a zero. But what we're also saying is that we are holding cash that has been paid to the Harbour Authority in advance of boat fees for subsequent years. So what I'm asking is, that money has to be in a bank account somewhere. Is it correct that doesn't then apply, that appear in line 9, which is stated as being a sum of all bank accounts?
Sorry, yep, I understand now. That's, I think, where we show it as a debtor rather than the cash as bank. We actually show it as the debtor, which is the accounting treatment agreed with Audit Wales. Okay, so it's just that treatment that you're not actually including all the bank statements into that sum of all bank statements. Okay, so it's a bit confusing for non-finance people like myself. So, okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Griffiths. Councillor Martin Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Let's looking at this, and it's obviously it's been run on a net basis in that it covers its own costs and no more. Is that a statutory position? And I'm not advocating we suddenly ramp up the fees or anything like that, but in the event that there is a surplus, does that have to be retained within this account, or can it be taken elsewhere? And it's a general question rather than a suggestion.
Nigel.
We think it's self-contained, but Councillor Williams, what I'd rather do is just take that query away and come back to you to give you a definitive answer, if that's all right.
Yeah, that's nice. I know there's legislation around parking and such things where the money has to be then reinvested if there's a surplus. So it's along those lines, really.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Councillor Williams. Thank you, Karis, for that. Are there any other questions? Any comments? No, you see the recommendation then that that we approve the unaudited Porth Call Harbour return 22-23 at Appendix A. Someone prepared to move, please?
I'll move.
Thank you, Councillor Griffiths. Can I have a seconder? Someone prepared to second?
Second, Chair.
Thank you,
Second.
Councillor Williams. Thank you. Anyone against? No, that's carried. Okay, the next item then is the Treasury Management. Is that you, Karis?
Yes, that's me this morning. Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to update you on the outturn position for our Treasury Management activities during the last financial year, and also to highlight the compliance with the Council's policies and procedures. So that the Treasury Management strategy for last year was approved by Council on the 23rd of February last year. There's a lot of detail in the report. It outlines the economic context within which we undertook our Treasury Management activity, which included the war in Ukraine, which kept global inflation rates higher than had been predicted. The economic backdrop during January to March earlier this year was characterised by high energy and commodity prices, high inflation, which has impacted on household budgets and spending. So the Consumer Price Index rose to 10.1% in the 12 months to March 2023. And interest rates also changed on a number of occasions during the last year to try and curb that inflationary pressure. So the bank rate started the year at 0.75% and increased 8 times during the year to 4.25% at the end of March 2023, which is unprecedented in recent years. So our Treasury Management activities are undertaken in line with the requirements of the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, and our Treasury Management activities were reported to this committee, to Cabinet and Council throughout the last financial year. So a summary of those activities is shown for you in Appendix A to this morning's report, and Table 1 in the report summarises for you our position at the year end with regard to external debt and investments. So just to summarise those, Chair, we didn't take out any new long-term debt during the year. No debt was rescheduled either during the year, as there was no financial benefit to doing this. We will obviously keep this under review as we go through the current year. There was a small increase in the number of Salix interest-free loans that the Council had at the end of the year. Our total external borrowing for the Council was managed at £99.93 million at the end of March. As you know, we also make investments, and the balance of our investments at the year end was £74.5 million, which is a reduction of £10 million as compared with the previous March. The income being earned on our investments is now increasing due to those base rate changes which I outlined for you earlier. So the average interest rate increased from 0.43% in 21-22 to 2.55% in 22-23. Obviously, when investing the Council's monies, we do due regard to ensure the security and liquidity of those investments before seeking the highest rate of return. So if I can, Chair, I'd just take you to section 9 of the report, where it's recommended that the committee notes the annual Treasury activities for last year and also notes the Treasury management indicators for the same year against those approved in the Treasury management strategy for the year. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that, Caris. Again, comprehensive report. Questions, Councillor Griffiths?
Thank you very much, Chair. The comment I'd like to make is this is probably the driest report that I think I receive as council. It's quite difficult to read. It's quite difficult to understand, and there isn't really important information in here, which is sometimes difficult to pull out of the report. So what I would like to suggest is that maybe for the next version of this, we try to, without use the wrong word, to sex it up a little bit. You know, can we put something at the top which is highlights this quarter, or can we stick a couple of graphs in it to show, for example, that those 8 increases for interest rates, and can we pick out some real highlights, like, you know, as you actually did verbally, I think, Caris, which was really helpful. If your verbal comments had been, these are the highlights for this quarter, in terms which any resident with you know a senior school education would be able to understand, I think that would help the accessibility to our residents of reports like this. But at the moment, this is something that I think could only be read really with somebody with an accounting, fairly maybe A-level accounting or something like that. And I'd really like to bring it down to somebody with a much broader education if possible.
Happy to take those comments on board, Chair. I mean, this is a very technical area for us in finance, really, and hence why we try to do annual training with yourselves, really, because we appreciate that it is sometimes difficult to break through the language and things that we use. But happy to take on, and certain things we have to report in order to comply with the requirements on us for reporting. But I do take on board your comments, and happy to do some summaries, I suppose, as we go through along the lines that you've just spoken, so that we can put some graphs in and some tables, which would probably, I appreciate, mean more to some people than the current text that's in there. So we can certainly look at that to develop as we go through now.
Many thanks.
Thank you again for that, Caris. I think that would be useful. You know, some short executive summaries maybe, which would be good. Councillor Martin Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Just to prove I do look at these reports. If we look at table 1 and the PFI line, which I presume, I know a dangerous thing to do, but I presume is my stake score. So the principal has reduced. We've paid off £800,000 in the financial year. Excuse me. What I just like to know, and again, it's for information and depending on the answer, maybe for people to consider, is given the increase in interest rates and the indication that they're only going to go up in the short term, and given the size of our reserves, I think Caris will know where I'm coming from here. Is there any opportunity, should it be advantageous, to settle the PFI debt from reserves to reduce any future, I would call OPEX, but revenue pressures? And again, it's for information, really. I don't even know whether that mechanism exists or whether there would be penalties, but has that been considered or even looked at, given the change of circumstances since the PFI was entered into?
I'd have to look at the details of that particular agreement, Councillor Williams, to see whether or not that's a possibility. But as I said when I introduced the report, we will review everything that we've got with interest rates changing with regards to the money that we've borrowed and whether or not there are any advantages or otherwise to us repaying that. And I would look at the PFI as part of that review. So I will take that away and I suppose confirm for you whether or not there is any clause within that agreement which would enable us to change at this current point in time.
Thanks for that clarity, Caris. Councillor Martin Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a comment, really. I think in reading this report, I think what we have to bear in mind is the amount of training that we received on this issue, which I found particularly valuable. And, that certainly helps for a greater understanding. So I think just to bear that in mind, that when we receive reports, we do get that back in from officers. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Martin. I know the officers put in a tremendous amount of time for training. I've said it before, it's a bit of a black art, treasury management. It's very difficult to understand on occasions, and I'm glad we've got professionals on the front table there who actually can understand it a little bit better than I sometimes. So I'm sure that if further training was needed for clarification or anything, subject to timing, I'm sure Caris and the team could undertake that. Caris, did you want to come in?
I was just going to say thank you for that comment. We are conscious that a number of the issues we bring here, treasury management is one, the statement of accounts is another. They're very technical documents, and that we have limited manoeuvre with regards to how we present some of this information because we're told what we need to report. However, it's really good to have feedback from members. So I would suggest the treasury management one, we probably refresh every year for you because you don't get the reports very frequently, and therefore you might need a refresher. The same on the statement of accounts, but what I was going to say is if there are any other areas where we're bringing reports to you where that kind of training or briefing session would be helpful, then please just tell us, because it's important to us you understand the reports that are being presented to you, and therefore you can rightfully probe then when maybe you've got a bit more information behind you. So if there are any, if you look at our forward work programme that you think it would be helpful for you to have that kind of briefing in advance, then we're more than happy to do that, Chair.
Thank you for that, Caris, and for that confirmation. I'm sure members certainly will take that up as and when the need arises. There's no one showing any further questions. Are there any comments from anyone? No. If we go to the recommendation, then the recommendations that we note the annual Treasury activities for 22-23, and we note the actual Treasury management indicators for 22-23 against those approved in the Treasury management strategy for 22-23. Someone prepared to move, please?
I move, Chair.
Thank you, Martin. Someone prepared to second?
I'll second. Colin Davis.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you very much, Councillor Davis. Anyone against? No. Thank you. That's carried. Next item on the agenda is the annual fraud report, and I think that's Simon.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, for the purpose of the recording, it's Simon Roberts, Senior Fraud Investigator. The purpose of this report is to provide members of the committee with the annual Corporate Fraud Report 22-23, and it summarises the actions that have been undertaken in respect to counter fraud, and also provides an update on the National Fraud Initiative exercise. If I may just draw the members' attention to some of the key points. Section 3 of the report provides some detailed information in respect of our work in connection with the National Fraud Initiative. Section 4 of the report details the counter fraud and corruption work undertaken, and also provides detailed information on our council tax reduction fraud investigations, to include monetary savings identified and the resulting successful sanctions obtained, to include prosecutions and financial penalties. There's also some detail within this section around work on our blue badge misuse and any internal investigations that have been undertaken primarily by internal audit. If I may also point out Annex 1, some feedback there. Annex 1, which provides information on the ongoing measures the Council proposes to take over the medium-term future to further improve its resilience to fraud, bribery and corruption. I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, thank you for that, Simon. Again, fairly detailed report. Councillor Griffiths?
Yeah, I 2 points to make, really. One, and it's not really a comment on this report, it's more about a comment on the council's attitude towards fraud and error. I don't feel we're taking it seriously. I don't think we've got a focus on it, and I think the numbers in here bear out that we are probably not even touching a small percentage of the overall fraud that's going on, simply because we're not aware of it, because we haven't got enough focus on it. I said this last year, and I'm going to say it again. If we would actually put a small amount of investment in much more active fraud and error investigation, then I do believe that it would have a net significant benefit financially for the council. The amount of fraud that goes on across the country in fraud and error is huge. And the more that we go into a cost of living crisis, the more that fraud will actually happen. So I don't think we're taking it seriously. And I know that we've got very few staff in this, and it's very difficult to do. But I do wonder whether somebody should be looking at a business case to say, let's put 3 people, employ 3 people to come in, do fraud and error investigations, work with people like Data.Wales to identify the cases, because they will give us free advice on data mining, for example, and see whether we can get a positive business case based on that. I think that's my general point, and it's a sort of a high level one, but it's I think we're losing money here, and I don't think we even know that we're losing money.
Thank you, Councillor Griffiths. Caris, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for those comments. I think just to reassure you that we do take this seriously, and wherever we are aware of fraud, then we take the appropriate action in order to deal with it. So you'll see in the report there are some examples there of where we have taken action. I appreciate that the numbers or the value of those are low at the moment, but some of that data exercise had only started early in the year because we had the NFI information in January this year. And obviously this is the annual report, so we're showing 3 months work, if you like, in relation to that. We do continue to work on that data throughout the period before the next lot of data comes out to us again. So where we are aware of it, then yes, we do take the necessary action. I do appreciate what you're saying, though, Councillor Griffiths, and I know in some other areas they've looked at whether or not there's a business plan to actually invest in this area along the lines of an investor save proposal, and I'm sure that's something that we could certainly take away and have a look at. I wonder if you mind, Chair, Andrew Wathen from the Internal Audit Service is asking to come in on this particular issue as well.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Andrew?
Thanks, Caris. Morning, Chairman, morning members. Andrew Wathen, Head of the Regional Internal Audit Service. Just to reiterate, really, and I'm sure members are well aware of this, in terms of the National Fraud Initiative, it's a UK-wide exercise. It covers over 1,200 public sector organisations in terms of a data matching exercise, and it covers a comprehensive suite of data matching, both internally and across all of those 1,200 organisations. So when we get the matches back for Bridgend, we certainly look into those, and we do take them seriously, and we do come up with some identified frauds, which we then seek to recover the money from. So just to give members some reassurance that it is a comprehensive exercise, and we are very proactive in terms of dealing with it.
Thank you, Andrew. Councillor Martin Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few observations and a question at the end. I think, first of all, it's important that we, accept that assurance from Andrew in response to the previous issues that have been raised. A few specific questions. First of all, on I think it's item 3.7, the single person's discount. I think what would be handy there is if we had some breakdown about the households that these frauds do occur. We've got the figure of 171. These might be due to common law relationships or perhaps parent and child arrangements. There are different scenarios, I think, that maybe we could try to focus on maybe next time. And also on page 190, the Council Tax Reduction Fund, just to point out the good work that staff are doing there in identifying 31 out of 89 cases that arose. But we're also relying, of course, on anonymous reports, which are being followed up. So they do total up quite significantly. As far as the cases closed, as reported on page 191, a number of them, I think the majority of them, 29 out of 35, were not investigated. The question I'd ask really is, are we flagging these up for the future so that we can, not be surprised if they reoccur at some later point? And finally, on page 191, the Welsh statutory instrument, which 2013 regulations determine the amount of fines that we can apply. Just to put it out there, basically, that these fines appear to be, relatively small when you consider the whole aspect of fraud, and probably 10 years on would be in need of review. I'd be interested to see what lobbying is going on with the Welsh Government to see if we can get these rates updated so that it will make our job that much easier then. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for those comments and certainly some questions. I don't know, Karis, did you want to deal with them?
I think I can answer some of them, Chair. In respect to your first comment, Councillor, about the 29 referrals which were closed, they are primarily referrals which we've received anonymously from members of the public. 9 times out of 10 in that situation, it's either insufficient evidence has been provided to us to even trace the person they're referring to, or it could well be that they're not even in receipt of benefits, because we do often get a lot of referrals in, and of course a member of the public wouldn't be aware if that person is claiming or not, or even that they are claiming, but perhaps the allegation they're making has already been declared to us. There is a record kept of all them, so obviously if we did receive that referral again, we would be able to match that up, and indeed if any extra information comes in, which then results in us being able to investigate it, then that would be possible, because all referrals are tracked basically on relevant systems, so we would have details of that. In respect of your question about the penalties, the main penalty which we tend to implement is the 50% penalty. That 50% penalty is 50% of the overpayment, so of course that would be dependent on how much that person had been overpaid, but you are quite right, there is a maximum of £1,000. So even if somebody perhaps was overpaid £5,000, we would only be able to implement the 50%, the maximum penalty, I should say, of £1,000. But again, as you rightly say, they are set by Welsh Government, so there isn't really anything that we could do here about that unless those regulations are changed. I'm not aware of anything being put in place to change them, but there's certainly nothing that's been brought to my attention. If that answers your question.
Thank you for that. Karis, anything else or no? Councillor Simon Griffiths.
Thanks very much, Chair. Just a comment on page 194 and 195. And I think this goes back to my earlier comment as well. These seemed all educational, well, except for point 3, I think. All the rest of them are educational, raising awareness, maintaining authorities, membership of things. I'd really like to see fraud and error reduction actions here, which is what actually are we doing, and what can we doing in the future to do these, and looking at newer areas to investigate. So this is a very passive sort of list of things. Can we actually do something which is much more active and targeted? And maybe that's it somewhere else, but it just seems a bit wishy-washy to me.
I mean, that's a helpful comment, Councillor. We can certainly go away and look at that, and maybe there's something in there, as you said, around targets for us to look at. Obviously, they're difficult because it depends what happens during the year. And we're not always generating that work ourselves, are we? We are dependent on those issues being brought to our attention. But certainly, I take on board what you're saying about the action plan, and we can have a look at that. And maybe a little bit like the last agenda item we were discussing, we probably need to put some more of that information possibly in the report for you, so that you have a better idea of the work that is going on in the service.
That would be very good. Thank you very much, Carys.
Thank you, Carys. Councillor Martin Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Not directly fraud, but very much related insofar as it is sort of forensic cost recovery. And it may be for a future meeting, but how much or how closely are we looking at other avenues for recovery that are left on the table? And I'll give you an example. The Kia contract is predicated on penalty points for non-performance. So if they don't take your blue bag back and stick it in your black box, then there's 1 penalty point for that. And if they don't pick up the rubbish, then there's 2 penalty points, and a miscollection is 10. And you get the picture. I know there was a Freedom of Information request on this a few years back, and when you compared those penalty points against the contract, there was, on the face of it, quite a lot of money left on the table between what was deducted and what the gross figure would be. So whilst it's not fraud, it is similar insofar as that there are potentially monies out there, either through our contract management or through some of our regulatory activities, street works, parking, this, that, and the other. And how closely, as an authority, are we? These aren't revenue opportunities; they shouldn't be seen as that. But how closely are we monitoring our recovery of those? Well, if nothing else, to improve the service and clearly reduce the outgoings. So I mean, we have to be careful not to say that it's revenue generation, but how much are we missing out on there? And I would suggest it might be far more than any fraud committed by households, but of course we don't know the numbers.
I mean, I can come in quickly on that if you like, Chair. I think, as you said, Councillor Williams, that's not necessarily fraud. Well, is it deliberate or not? But it certainly wouldn't be covered by the work that's being done here. A lot of that would be done via our contract management processes, really. And I think we do need to be sharp, and people need to know that we will claim back if somebody has gone outside of the contract or not performed as required. Then the council will take the necessary action to get that money back if that's what the contract allows us to do. So I would agree that's a piece of work that we probably need to sharpen up on a little bit. So yeah, I don't think it necessarily comes under this particular remit, but it is something we need to sharpen up on through our contract management arrangements, I would suggest.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Carys.
That's okay. But Councillor Williams, I'd endorse that. I don't think it's a matter for this committee. It's not fraudulent if someone doesn't comply with a term and condition of their contract. And obviously there are provisions within a contract where you can recover, or there is a penalty payment. And obviously sometimes if works are overdue, then there's another payment to be made. So I think it may be a question for another committee to look at, certainly in regards to your contract monitoring, your contract enforcement, and maybe for one of the scrutiny committees just to do a look at some of these contractual relationships in regards to what is recovered and what isn't recovered. So I think that's a piece of work for another committee. But
sorry, Shane, the only thing I'd come back on there is it is cross. No, I fully accept it's not fraud, but I made the connection in my mind as we were talking about it now. I fully accept that. The only thing I would say is that there's this sort of thing happens across the directorates, and there's contract management all over the place, and whether this is the committee to look at our approach to that. But I'll leave that with you and Carys to consider.
Yeah, I think we just need to be cautious with the language we use. That's all I'm pointing at. Frauders have got a very, very specific meaning, and what I wouldn't want is our contractors to think that they're committing fraud by not complying with the terms and conditions of the contract. So, because there are other provisions, otherwise there wouldn't be a contract. So I take on board what you say, and I think it needs to be discussed in a different place at a different time. Councillor Davis.
Thanks, Chair. In the spirit of some of the comments made by Councillor Simon Griffiths and Councillor Martin Williams, on page 190, 4.8, there's a lot of referrals that go from the council to the DWP, and we get no reply. We have no idea, no picture of what occurs. Now, some of that may be to do with GDPR issues, which is fair enough, but would it be worthwhile inviting a local manager, fraud manager from the DWP to this meeting, just to give an outline of some of the work they do? It just goes along really with some of the comments made by Councillor Griffiths regarding, targeted actions to reduce fraud in the Bridgend area. And I just wonder whether that might be something the committee could consider, as I say, in terms of inviting somebody from the DWP to talk to us about, that almost like a black hole of referrals. And it might ease some of the frustrations of the officers who are probably trying their best to engage with the DWP, but not getting very far. So yeah, that's just a commentary and a question. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Davis. Gareth, I don't know whether Simon.
Yeah, Councillor Davis, I can partly answer that. The referrals that go to the Department for Work and Pensions do actually get routed to a centralised inbox, and the referrals are then distributed across the country. So to be honest with you, quite often the DWP stance now is a lot of telephone interviews take place. So it may well be dealt with by a job centre in Taunton, or we even get referrals which are sent to Scotland. So they're actually dealing with cases which are sent from Bridgend. So it's not dealt with by a local office, if that's the right way of putting it. Once they leave us, unfortunately, we get no feedback unless they happen to come back to us to request some further information, which again is quite rare. So whilst we keep a record of all the referrals that are sent, quite often we have no point of contact to go to find out whatever happens to them, if that makes sense. So there isn't really like a localized manager who you could invite. I hope that makes sense in my explanation, but that's why it's in the report that we get no feedback, because I'm afraid that is the situation with the DWP and the way they've decided to operate.
If I can come back, Chair. There's a DWP manager for everything. I deal with the DWP on a daily basis. They've got staff who work on all kinds of things. There will be a local South Wales-based DWP manager who deals with fraud that we could invite to a meeting just to explain, if not about individual cases, as I said, because there are probably GDPR issues, but in terms of their methodology, their policies. And I know this for a fact as well. Virtually each job centre and each region deals with different DWP issues in a different way. So you can go to Bridgend Job Centre, for example, and you could have a response about a particular issue. You could then go to the job centre in Port Talbot or the job centre in Barry, and you'd have a different response. So I know that there will be somebody locally who has a responsibility to deal with fraud and would probably be amenable to coming along and just talking a little bit about, what they do and how they do it. I think it's worth a try. Thanks.
Can I suggest before Caris comes in, obviously, I think it would be of value to the councillors, not just this committee, to know the process, I would have thought, in regards to DWP referrals and the process they undertake. And obviously, Caris can make that request. I'm sure if that was the wish of the council to do so, because 8 members of this committee, I think it would be beneficial to all members of the council to listen to a small seminar, really, in some respects, I would suggest, rather than outside the meeting. And I agree with you, Councillor Davis. You need to make the request, and ultimately there's a reason why you're making the request, and then let the DWP make the decision who they send, because in my view, the information quite clearly is important to you, and you don't know what you don't know. So subject to obviously Caris approaching her, the management team and presumably the respective leaders of the groups, then it may be worth just getting a session where DWP are invited to discuss this very specific issue and to give you that reassurance or whatever as to what happens once the referrals are made from Bridgend into the system, and then you get the discussion from the horse's mouth, really. I don't know what your view would be on that, Caris.
I can certainly approach the DWP on the basis of the discussions this morning and see if they'd be willing to do that kind of an informal seminar with yourselves around this. Obviously, what it won't be able to do is talk about individual cases, but it can certainly talk to you about what their process would be and how they would deal with issues. So I'm happy to make that approach and feed back to you how successful that is.
Thank you for that, Caris. There are no other questions. Are there any comments now? Councillor Griffiths?
Thank you, Chair. I may disagree with you actually on something you said a little bit earlier about fraud and error. The discipline in the industry is almost always described as fraud and error, because the difference between fraud and error is only intent. Is there an intent to defraud, or is it an accidental error? And when you look at places like the NHS and especially the DWP, they group these things together. And I'm just reading off the DWP website at the moment. It says overpayments and underpayments happen because of fraud, claimant error, or official error, processing errors. And so you tend to group those together because in the discipline you identify what the error is, and that may be the result of a fraud, but it may not be. But the group of things also has a benefit if you can actually find them. So what I would say is that this committee itself should actually look at the broader topic of fraud and error as per the industry discipline, because you don't know whether there's fraud until you finish the work, if you see what I mean. You can't tell what the intent of the person was, and maybe you never can, and maybe you can't prosecute. But what you might be able to do is just say it's an error. Sorry. I've certainly worked on cases where I worked on one particular with pharmacies across the UK where they were misclaiming monies from the NHS, and it saved like 15-20 million by just writing them a letter to saying we think you've made an error in the way that you're processing. Please fix it. Everybody knew that it was knowing fraud, but you couldn't prosecute him, and he just wasn't worth prosecuting that many pharmacies. But just a simple letter acknowledging an error, and it got corrected. So I think there are things like that which we might be able to do, and it's only helpful to prejudge a particular discrepancy by assuming it's either fraud or error. So apologies for that long description, Chair.
No, that's okay, Councillor Griffiths. Obviously, I think we need to be guided by the officers here in regards to what they are required to report and what they're not required to report, and what we can look at and what we can't look at. So I know maybe a little bit of work for you, Caris, and your team, but I think we just need to be careful that we don't stray into things that are not relevant to us in regards to how things are defined. And I take on board completely what you say, Councillor Griffiths, but we just need to urge some caution. If we can look at things, then we will do. If we can't, then obviously we just need to be advised. Councillor Griffiths, sorry.
I'm all done. Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, if there's no further comments, Caris, the only other comment I was going to make, or whether we actually put an additional recommendation in the report as a 9.2, is picking up the points that Simon raised and Councillor Martin Hughes raised, is whether we should write to the WLGA and Welsh Government expressing our concern at the low threshold of recovery, which are now covered in the 2013 regulations, and basically suggesting or proposing that they should be reviewed. I don't know whether that would cause any difficulties for anyone, but at least then it flags up that we as a committee here have raised those issues and basically consider that they should be looked at. I don't know whether that would cause you any problem, Caris, or whether it should come from the Chief Exec or where it should come from.
I can certainly take that forward, Chair, and contact the WLGA to see whether or not any discussions are going on with regards to that, and whether they're aware of any discussions on that. And then maybe when we've got that answer, we can determine the best way to move that forward.
Yeah. Would you be happy with that, Councillor Hughes?
Yes, Chair, I think that addresses it really well. Thank you.
Okay. So Caris, you happy for just a little recommendation then that you write to WLGA on that point? Lovely, thank you. Okay, so just for members then, we got the recommendations that we note the annual corporate fraud report 22-23, the measures in place, the work being undertaken to prevent and detect fraud, and the error in the update on the National Fraud Initiative. And line 2, that Caris, I don't know what your title is again, I forget, the directive writes to WLGA to seek confirmation as to whether or not the council tax reduction scheme, detection of fraud enforcement Wales regulations 23 are being reviewed, or anything's being done to them. Someone prepared to move, please?
Yes, I move, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Do I have a seconder?
Second, Colin Davis.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Anyone against? No, thank you. That's carried. The next item then is item 10, which is the regulatory tracker, and I think that's Alex.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And for the record, I'm Alex Rawling, Corporate Policy and Performance Manager. The regulatory tracker you've got in front of you has been in place for 6 months now. It's here for the second time, this time covering quarters 3 and 4 of 22-23. At your meeting on the 26th of January, members asked the performance team to address the following issues: improving the link or referral process to scrutiny committees and adding a column on the tracker to reflect whether or when each inspection or audit has been considered by a scrutiny committee, naming a lead officer for each recommendation on the tracker, adding target dates for completion against each recommendation, and providing a reminder of blue, red, amber, yellow, green definitions. We feel we've addressed each of these concerns, although one needs further discussion, which I'll come to in a minute. So just a really quick update on what the quarter 3, quarter 4 tracker is telling us. There are 7 new inspections on there, including the Audit Wales Performance Management Review, CIW Improvement Check for Children's Services with 10 recommendations, and 3 residential home inspections, breakaway short stay services and domiciliary services. 33 recommendations have been closed, including 7 recommendations from new audits and inspections, and we're now up to 82 recommendations to deal with on the tracker. So there's a few things I'd particularly like to work with the Governance and Audit Committee on, to reflect on and to clarify. Firstly, the tracker's starting to get quite unwieldy now. We need to make sure written updates are very brief and that we're using an agreed process for taking off any audits that are completed. So in section 3.6, you can see I recommend to Governance and Audit Committee consider some options for reducing the size of the tracker by reducing the length of updates, potentially by cross-referencing other documents or by mandating maximum word counts, or by excluding some inspections from the tracker, or by changing the mechanism for closing down audit recommendations. Also, there seems to be a bit of a lag in some areas, so new audits and inspections aren't particularly new and they're hitting the tracker for the first time with all items complete. That doesn't seem to me to add any value in the process for you guys as members, although I think it is going to be inevitable for some of the inspections of care homes, etc., as PANs have to be responded to really quickly. So we probably just need to think about how we manage that. And then just finally, clearly at the moment, realistically, none of the items are going to scrutiny committees. And I think that's inevitable given we didn't have a regulatory tracker until quite recently, but I think we would want to see that number increase and quite quickly. Committees have had the tracker to use for their forward planning this year for the first time. And then in section 3.1, we pose a number of options for dealing with additional referrals. These are that Governance and Audit Committee could refer specific audits or recommendations to the relevant subject overview and scrutiny committee. Alternatively, Governance and Audit Committee could request an update be added to their own forward work programme for 6 months after any new audit or inspection is reported to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Alex. Obviously, there's some questions for us there in regards to how we deal with this and move it forward. But before we look at that, some questions. Councillor Davis.
Chair. Agree with everything Alex has said, to be fair. I think what's quite stark is, I don't know whether this is a post-COVID hangover, but if you look at 3.3 on 202, the top table, in less than a year, the recommendations have doubled. But to be fair, the number of open recommendations has conversely dropped by 50%. So to be fair, there's a lot of work has gone on. I agree with Alex's point about, if recommendations have been closed satisfactorily, are they worth coming here? And also then in terms of, it is a new and increasingly effective process with it's getting more sophisticated additions all the time, which is great. Should we, as Alex suggested, be almost like a clearinghouse in some ways, in that we do receive some, but we also pass others on to more relevant committees. So yes, just some general thoughts, really. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Davis. Councillor Hughes.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's just picking up on Alex's recommendation that we do try to be succinct where possible with the tracker. I don't know if Alex has considered the possible use of embedded links to documents, so that if they appear on the tracker, it's just a question of being able to click, and that will certainly save on the word count to make cross-referencing that much easier. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Is there any other comments from anyone? Oh, Andrew.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. I was just going to say, in terms of Alex's paper, I think this is a big step forward in terms of having a regulatory tracker, so that's good news. I agree that there's a risk this could become a bit unmanageable. And I suppose just sort of reviewing the paper, I suppose I don't know if it's just me personally, but I struggle to get a feel for what are the high and medium activities. And I think that was then compounded a little bit when we look at the RAG status. And for some of them where we have a due date of June, it's green. Well, I'm thinking it's gone June, so I'm not quite sure about that one. And there's a couple then which are amber, which have got like a date much further down the line. So I think there's some sort of alignment there or tidying up we can do. I totally get that they might have a due date of January next year and they could still be amber, but certainly I'm struggling with if they're green and they're past the due date. And in terms of the comment about closed, I think I agree. I don't think closed need to be on here. Maybe that could come across in the narrative, but somewhere within the authority, I think if I suppose officers are updating it as closed, we just need it to be challenged or sense checked somewhere such that they're not just being closed just to get off a list. But I think it's a step forward, but might need a little bit more tinkering. But I do share your pain in terms of trying to keep this manageable. So thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Are there any other comments from anyone? I think just some comments from me. I think we just need to ensure that this is telling us where we are exactly in regards to moving forward. And I think maybe in moving forward, the things that need to come to our committee may be the amber and red issues. Clearly, I hear what Andrew says in regards to the green issues, and I would hope that apart from the directorates who are dealing with this on a daily or a weekly basis to ensure that the matters dealt with and appropriately move forward, is whether we actually as a committee in moving forward deal with just amber and reds, because there is only one red on here at the moment, which is the ensuring sufficient and sustainable workforce with capacity and capability to meet the statutory responsibilities. And now clearly there are amber issues on there, but work is commencing in regards to various dates. Whether we need to see the green ones, is up for discussion, but I would hope that those are just progressing and only need to be challenged if they become amber or red. But that would be my sort of suggestion, rather than have copious amounts of blues and greens as well. I don't know whether that would meet some of your requirements, Alex.
Yeah, I think it would, and maybe we could bring the ambers, reds, and anything that's been closed in the previous period, just so that you can bring that bit of rigour to, as you said, has it really been closed, or are you just trying to get it off the list? And we can also take into account the, so that hopefully would cover some of Andrew's comments as well. In terms of the embedded links, yeah, we can absolutely do that, and that could be really helpful for things like the CIW big inspection. You know, obviously that's got 40 odd recommendations, and we could cover them all with one link. And then I suppose the question on the closed ones is, at the moment we won't take an audit or inspection off the list if it's got any open recommendations. So if it's got 4 and only one of them's closed, the 4 of them will stay on there. We could revise that and just leave the open ones on there, but it would look like they were quite small, potentially small inspections. But as long as you know that, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, you could. But if you had a recommendation where there were, I don't know, an action where there were 10 recommendations, and 5 had been blue and dealt with, there could be just one like to say, look, five of these issues have been dealt with and they're blue, and you've got the others which are presumably amber or red, or they're, whatever, they're green. It's just, I completely agree, it's just making it simpler for you and easier for the committee to understand. Okay, Councillor Griffiths?
Yeah, genuine support of the suggestions there. I mean, when I looked through this, I was definitely interested in the amber as well as the reds, and there are some points in there. I think the blues should definitely disappear. There's no point continuing to repeat them, and the greens we don't need to look at. So I think the suggestions you've made there, which are a one-off statement of what's been closed in the previous period, and then on an exception basis, look at the ambers and reds. So just, I think, supporting your suggestion there, Chair.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I only look at the ambers and reds when I look at a report. Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Griffiths. Councillor Davis?
Thanks, Chair. Dare I say it, Chair, should we move this up the agenda? Because it tends to be the last item every time. And sometimes, other issues are being covered, perhaps. So I don't know whether it's worth, it is one of our prime tools for monitoring. Should we shift it up the agenda to one of the earliest points to the agenda? Thanks.
Yeah, my comment about that, in some respects, is irrelevant where it is on the agenda, because we're here for the whole session and really should be spending our time in all of it. And who's to say that the statement of accounts isn't more important than the tracker? So I hear what you say, and clearly we can leave it to the officers to decide. But wherever it is, we're going to deal with it on the agenda in any event. So I think if we can simplify it for us as a committee, then it'll make it a lot easier to deal with. Councillor Bledsoe?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm very supportive of everything that's been said about simplifying this report. I suppose I'm looking for a little bit of assurance, really, if not us, then there is scrutiny over the colour designation by some committee somewhere. That, if we're going to say that we don't need to see blues and we don't need to see greens, is there a way that the designation of those as blues and greens is scrutinised by some committees somewhere? So we don't just say, well, an officer has dedicated it at that colour, so we're not going to look at it, we're not going to scrutinise it. And that, I'm trying to balance that with the need to make it simpler and more understanding. I'm just looking for assurance that somebody somewhere will be scrutinising that, if not us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor. Alex, did you want to comment there? Because obviously the tracker is new, really, and is evolving. And then clearly what Councillor Bledsoe said, then some of these issues could be referred to the relevant committee or whatever. But I'd welcome your advice on that.
Yeah, at the moment, the report's going to CMB, CCMB and CPA, but you're absolutely right. At the moment, no, I don't think there's been any challenge of any of the colour ratings. So I don't know whether that's for you or for CCMB or for CPA, but you're right, nobody's doing it. We're obviously doing it as a performance team, saying, hang on a minute, are you sure you've done this? And CMB are looking through it in their own session, but I don't think there's been that kind of, I think it has been taken at face value.
Councillor Bledsoe?
Yeah, and in no way am I questioning that in any way. I'm looking at the checks and balances that we have to do so that we protect ourselves. You know, in no way am I saying that the team hasn't done the right designation, but I believe we need to have that mechanism in place for security going forward. And as I say, not necessarily us, but somebody somewhere is doing that from an elected representative perspective.
Yeah, it's. I don't know whether Karis or Alex can give some advice here. Is whether or not, if we get them as blue, we can refer those blue issues to the relevant scrutiny committee en bloc and say, look, we've been advised that these matters have been dealt with and closed. Over to you now, whether you want to do a deeper dive into it or do you want to just, you know, get the director there to comment on it or whatever. It's a mechanism within the council. I'm sure we can recommend we refer it to the scrutiny committee, but then it's just getting that reassurance.
I think if you were to do that, you'd probably need it as a relatively standing item at those subject overview and scrutiny committees, and whether they're, I mean, that they, I guess, would be up for that if you're telling them to be. Maybe they need to have it. What are they having it at the moment? Once a year, so maybe they need to see the report twice a year, as you do, and either before or after you do, so they can refer things back to you, or you can refer things to them. Either way, I think we can add another session, not another session. We can add it into another one of their meetings, I'm sure. And they're probably more in a position to challenge whether those blues really have been completed or the greens really are on target.
Yeah, I somewhere else from a, you know, once they've been dealt with, and we're being the but clearly if being moved, obviously scrutiny could take a look at your on. I don't know. It needs just to go away and some thought given to it.
Yeah, we can do that, and we can bring that back to January meeting with a recommendation, a firm recommendation for what we do. Obviously, in the meantime, the scrutiny committees have had the regulatory tracker for developing their forward programmes, so they will have used it as such, and they'll have things. So, for example, we're going to overview and scrutiny with the performance management review in October. So it'll be there already, and we'll do a formal firm recommendation in January to yourselves.
Chair, we're struggling with your connection at the moment. Can you hear us?
Okay. If we're happy to pick that up then and maybe deal with it and refer them to scrutiny.
I'm not hearing anything from the chair at all at the minute. I'm not sure if others can.
No, I can't either.
Chair, I don't know whether you can hear us, but we can't hear you at this end. It's been suggested maybe if you turned your camera off, we might still be able to hear you, even though we won't be able to see you. No, it looks like we've lost connection there. Mark, do we have a deputy who can step in?
Yes, I'm wondering if Mr. Bagley could possibly take over we've only got a couple of items left, if as Vice Chair, if that would be okay with Mr. Bagley, please.
Yeah, that's fine. And hopefully the legal chair will join back shortly. So yeah, just continuing where we were, we've just covered off the regular tracker, so we're moving on to item number 11, which is the corporate self-assessment. Bear with me.
Mr. Chair, could I just ask? Could I just be very clear on what was agreed on the last item, because I couldn't hear very much of what the chair was saying. I'm just wondering what the resolution was based around the protocol for checking the blues. I could barely hear anything. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks.
So I think just to summarise that last section, I think the proposal was that there's going to be a paper coming back to the next audit committee, which will sort of detail those proposals as we move forward in terms of what is going to which committees and how we're going to take forward that revised report. Is that correct?
Was it moved and seconded?
Can I ask somebody to propose that?
I propose as I raised it. Thanks.
And somebody to second it?
I'd happily second that. Thank you, Chair.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no further questions, let's move on to item number 11, which is the corporate self-assessment.
That's me again then. Thank you, Chair. The approach to self-assessment went to CMB in March and to yourselves at your last meeting. In self-assessment, we're required by Welsh Government to demonstrate that we're doing three things: performing well and improving outcomes, using our resources well, using the 7 types of use of resources in the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and using proper governance. Because we've now woven most of the self-assessment process into our existing performance management processes, normal Q4 performance dashboards are closely reflected in the self-assessment draft report you have in front of you. Directorate DMTs use their performance dashboards to develop a directorate self-assessment, and the performance team pulled these together into a single report. This was then discussed and moderated at a CMB Heads of Service meeting in June and discussed by Corporate Performance Assessment earlier in July. We've come to our judgments on performance on each wellbeing objective in a way that is as objective as possible, but because we're balancing lots of different elements, many of them self-subjective, there is inevitably some subjectivity in there. The judgments are a balance of PI achievement, commitment achievement, broader direction of travel on continuous improvement, views of regulators, and findings from consultation, involvement, and engagement. We're obviously also judging ourselves against whether we feel we've improved, stayed the same, or got worse since last year's report. As the last year of this corporate plan period, the report will inevitably change quite significantly next year, but for this second year of self-assessment, we've kept to largely the same approach and kept the format of the report very similar. The judgments for the performance section are all the same as last year's, so on Wellbeing Objective 1, that's good, on Wellbeing Objective 2, adequate, and on Wellbeing Objective 3, good. The third section on governance is largely covered by the annual governance statement, which you've already discussed in some detail this morning, and our judgment on that section was that governance is good. So I'll say a bit more on the second section on use of resources. The process we've gone through this year is slightly different and was a heck of a lot easier. Heads of service and managers completed the 7 use of resources templates. We used the same range of internal and external evidence as we used last year, and that's listed on the templates. They built on and reflected last year's judgments and used the key lines of inquiry prompt questions that we developed last year using the 5 principles of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. These have again been through Heads of Service and CMB and then through CPA Challenge in June. So we've taken all that, pulled it together into 7 separate judgments and a single summary judgment exactly like last year. We've said, as per last year, that day-to-day management of resources is good, that there are clear and sensible processes, working models and relationships. But again, we've given ourselves an overall judgment of adequate. We've said that clear improvements have been made and are being made, but practical progress so far hasn't been enough to take us to a good rating. And obviously it doesn't help with that we only published our last self-assessment in November, so we're only talking about 7 or 8 months here. We've said that the main things to focus on are around vacancies and capacity issues, both in corporate teams and the senior managers who work alongside them. And then just to summarise the main changes we're making for this year for the report as a whole, we're publishing year-end performance alongside the self-assessment so people can compare looking at the commitments and PIs as well as the broader picture, including case studies in the self-assessment to highlight some areas of positive progress or good practice, and doing a formal process of consultation on the document over the summer, as well as more in-depth engagement and involvement activities in the summer and autumn with groups including Public Services Board, Youth Council, Town and Community Council Forum and others. And then just a few very small additional changes from the meeting with Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee on Monday, which are that they'd like us to add additional information on net zero and decarbonisation to reflect its higher priority status, and rewriting the section on V2C and empty homes case studies, which they felt were confusing. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks for that update. Yeah, Mr. Chair, you're back. I think you'd rejoined just as we're just doing an introduction to item 11. So yeah, back over to you.
My apologies. I don't know what happened, but I think we've got a bit of a kalima here. There's some sand coming over from Africa affecting the Wi-Fi. No, thank you for that, Alex. Can I just say now, is there any questions? No questions. Any comments? No comments. Right, Alex, I've got a couple of just comments in regards to the assessment. What concerns me on occasions is that the council is sort of judge and jury when it comes to the self-assessment. It assesses itself against a very specific set of criteria, and on occasions, obviously, managers don't want to raise issues where, you know, you could go from an adequate down to unsatisfactory or whatever. I'm not saying there are any here, but you know, there are issues which aren't up to standard. I'm just wondering whether or not it's opportune to have sort of some peer assessors looking at some of these issues from adjoining authorities, or whether someone from WLGA could actually come in as a critical friend and check and challenge. Now, I know under the legislation you have to have a peer assessment, I think every 5 years. And I'm just wondering, from a continuous improvement agenda point, whether it would be worthwhile getting some sort of independence in just to do that checks and balance. I'm not saying for every service or wherever, but to actually provide some, you know, balance into what is being delivered within the council. It could be good, it could be bad, but it actually gives that reassurance to people that you're not judging yourself where you know, it may be incorrect or whatever. So I'm just saying it to, if you know, councils want to be exemplars, then it should be on the continuous improvement agenda, and maybe not be afraid of actually putting itself out the self-assessment by peers. I'm just wondering whether that's been done.
No, that hasn't been done, and we weren't intending to do it until the second year of the new corporate plan. I think it was too soon to do it this year. We only had the message from WLGA that they were planning on taking on that function in April or May time, and we didn't want to ask them to do it in the first year of the new corporate plan because we thought we'd probably have enough going on in that process. So it probably will be the second year of the new corporate plan, which will be, well, that's only next year, I suppose, but the end of next year. I wonder whether in the meantime we might come up with something internally that might do the same kind of job, where we take the self-assessment to subject and overview committees, maybe. Obviously, it's been to Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee this time, but there's nothing to stop it going from the subject ones to have a look at. They could, you know, we've only got 3 wellbeing objectives in the old corporate plan, and we've got 3 scrutiny committees. They could, if they wanted to, they could certainly have a look at one each.
Yeah, you know, I'm just saying, if for sort of continuous improvement, you know, I don't know who looks at like the regulatory service. You've got a joint regulatory service, I think, with Cardiff not Cardiff, Vale Council and such like, is whether or not you bring people in from different authorities just to provide that constructive challenge. It's only a suggestion. I'm not saying we should do it, but whether it's a learning exercise, really. Councillor Griffiths.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I actually said a similar thing on a slightly different topic in corporate law review and scrutiny the other day, which is that the council is very directorate focused, and exactly as you point out, no director is going to really be particularly critical of their own area. And I do wonder whether there is something that we can use where one directorate looks at another, or a team of experts that are brought from multiple directorates actually do the review. I don't think I think there's insufficient time in scrutiny to be able to go into the detail of this from councillor perspective, but I think officers themselves. So again, I think, Caris, this is similar to the point I made in COSC, which is we need something which steps outside the directorates to challenge the directorates. The previous conversation was about cost savings and efficiency savings. This one is similar, but it's about on self-regulation and self-assessment.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Griffiths. Obviously, it's just food for thought, I think, for Caris and Alex, for the management team, just to provide. I quite agree with Councillor Griffiths in regards to director challenges. In a different place where I was, we had the other directorates challenge a very specific director. So education will go up, and then you'd have everyone else looking at it. So it's just for self-improvement, really, and that continuous improvement. So not saying it should be done immediately, but if it could just be thought about being done moving forward to give greater, clarity to the matters you're looking at.
Yeah, we'll do that. And just on the point that Councillor Griffiths made, we've put the subject of challenge meetings or Star Chamber meetings, or whatever we want to call them, on the agenda for the next CMB strategic meeting. I don't think that is for a while, but we'll be discussing it there.
Thanks, Alex. Are there any other questions? Any comments? So the recommendations then are in 9.1 that we review the recommendation for change to incorporate corporate assessment report 22-23 at Appendix A. And I don't think there are any additions to the report since 21-22 that add value to the document. Maybe just a suggestion about that sort of peer assessment or whatever could be mentioned. If people are happy with that, someone prepared to move the recommendation?
I'll move, Chair. Colin Davis. There you are.
I'll second, Chair.
Oh, nice to see you, Councillor Granville.
I do apologise, Chair. It's a duplication of meetings. I had to go out on site meetings, but I now join this meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Well, that shows commitment. Well done. So we've got a mover and a seconder. Anyone against? Nope, that's carried. Thank you very much. And I think the next one is the forward work programme, I think. So, am I right?
Yes, sorry, Chair, yes. Nigel Smith, Group Manager, Chief Accountant. The purpose of this report is to seek approval for the updated forward work programme for 23-24 as part of the role of this committee. In order to assist the committee in ensuring that due consideration is given to all aspects of their functions as set out in Section 2, the proposed forward work programme is attached to Appendix A. Members will be asked to endorse this schedule and confirm the list of people they'd like to invite for each item if appropriate, and indicate whether any additional information or research is required. Subject to any changes, the forward work programme for the next meeting is shown at para 3.2. If I could just clarify the discussion around the tracker, that's currently scheduled for January. I think was the intention, but there was discussion earlier about bringing that forward. Could you just clarify what members content with it coming to January, or is it to bring that forward?
I think January would be. We've got September, November, and January, haven't we? So we've just dealt with it now. Is there a requirement for us to bring it in September?
Nope, be happy to bring that in January just to confirm then.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Sorry, Chair.
Sorry, Nigel. In the back of my mind, there is something we were going to call in one of the schools.
Chair, that was in relation to a limited assurance internal audit report. Now, I understand that Audit have been back into that school and are currently pulling together that that report. So, yeah, I understand it's in draft format and it's been sent back to the school for comment, and it's come back as reasonable assurance. Therefore, if it's reasonable assurance, I understand you wouldn't want to see it. It would only come back here if they'd redone it and they continue to have limited assurance.
No, thank you for that. Pleasing to note. So, no, we wouldn't want them in next time. So, thanks for that. Okay, subject to that. Sorry, Nigel, we've got the recommendation.
Sorry, Chair, I think Andrew would like to come in on internal audit.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nigel. Just one thing, Chair. In terms of your annual report for Governance and Audit Committee, the report's been drafted. It's due to come in April per the work programme, but I think it'd be more meaningful for 22-23 to come in September if you members are happy with it.
Yeah, can we add that on to the September meeting?
Yes. Yep, happy to do that, Chair.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
So subject to that, one amendment, the recommendation is the committee considers and approves the forward work programme if you're content. Thank you.
Yeah, any questions on that? Or any comments? Obviously, subject to the addition of the annual report that we approve the updated forward work programme for 23-24. Someone prepared to move, please?
I'll formally move, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Granville. Now seconder.
Seconded, Chair.
Thank you very much. Anyone against? No. There are no other items, urgent or otherwise, and there are no exempt items. Can I just thank the officers again for comprehensive reports and, given the invaluable advice that they give to this committee and reassurance moving forward. So just like to thank Caris and the team who are here today doing that. Can I thank the members for the constructive questioning and debate that have been had? And can I wish you all well, safe journey home, and see you at the next meeting in September. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.